Hi guys, Aaron here with Ghost Raptor Gaming and Guns, and up for review today we have the Sig Sauer P229. Now this is a 40 caliber model and it's a DAK model, so I know a lot of you guys are already dropping off of the video, but I just thought it was kind of an interesting gun and I thought I'd have a lot of fun doing the review. So we're going to get into that. But first, a few housekeeping notes. Number one, I do have Buy Me a Coffee set up as well as my Patreon. So if you want to do a one-time donation to the channel versus a subscription-based donation, I'd really appreciate it. It goes a long way to simple things, gas, targets, ammunition that make these reviews possible. So thank you for your support. The other thing you may have noticed is my firearms reviews have been few and far between these days. I've been very busy and there's been a few other things going on that's kind of kept me from being able to do these reviews. That being said, it is of course a gaming channel too, so I will have a no commentary playthrough of Metro 2033 Redux coming up. It's going to be released once a week episodically, and then when that's complete I'll have a long play, which is a full playthrough, again no commentary. If you kind of dig that, let me know, because I have more planned for the future, but if there's some other things that may not have occurred to me that you guys would be interested in seeing, I'd be more than happy to try and get that done for you. So with all of that being said, let's move on to our full transparency as I always do here. Sig Sauer didn't send me this gun. The DAK models in particular haven't been in production for a long time. I bought this gun myself from AIM Surplus for $500. So nobody sent me this gun. There is no sponsor for this video. Second thing second, we're going to make sure, well, I guess first things first, we're going to make sure that the gun is clear and safe. No rounds in the magazine, and we have, of course, a clear magazine well and chamber. So, gun is clear and safe. With that all out of the way, let's get into the gun. So, this is a P229. This, again, is a 40 caliber DAK model. We're going to get into what DAK means in just a little while. The gun weighs 32 ounces, which is slightly lighter than the P226, which weighs 34 ounces. It has a 3.9 inch barrel. It's 1.5 inches thick. It's 5.4 inches in height and 7.1 inches in overall length, muzzle to beaver tail, that is. It comes with a standard 15 round capacity in 9mm, which is the same as the 226, and the same magazine capacity of 12 rounds in 40 or 357 SIG, which again is the same as the P226, which is really interesting because the 226 is longer in height as well as length. Not that that has to do anything, but it holds the same amount of rounds, which I found really interesting. We'll get into that in a little while. So the way I like to go through things here, besides the overall specs, is I like to go through the features and caveats of those features, front to back, top to bottom, as I go. So let's get right into it with the sights. The sights are a traditional Sig Sauer night sight. They are squared off. Equal height, equal light is easy to achieve. And of course, again, they are a night sight. And these are a little dim, but when they're brand new, they're quite bright. The rear sight also has a hard ledge on the back right here, so you can rack that off of any hard surfaces or hard edges, belts, boots, tables, whatever, what have you, especially if you're injured and now you're down to one-handed manipulation. So we're going to talk about the barrel. The barrel right now, as you can see, doesn't actually have a match crown. There's no recess in there. It's actually just rounded off, so it's a very traditional style of crown barrel, and it functioned just fine. This has a full-length guide rod assembly, which you can see right in there inside the frame, and I'll take the gun apart later so you can see it. And it's a very smooth operating gun as a result. It doesn't have a captive recoil spring. Unfortunately, that's free. Some of the newer models might, but again, this is an older model. So it doesn't have that, but as you can see right here, the gun operates very smoothly, and I do really like that a lot. It's very much akin to a smooth operating 1911. So moving down and rearward, you can see we don't have any front slide serrations right here. Again, it's an older gun, it's an older design. Newer ones will have that, especially the optic ready models. This one doesn't, and I am a fan of generally not having front slide serrations because they drive the cost of manufacture up, and they encourage you to put your hand near the muzzle, which I never think is a good thing. So moving back from there, we have our extractor. Our extractor on this one, as you may know, I prefer to have a longer, thicker extractor. They tend to be a little more durable and reliable. This one has a shorter one. However, it's fairly thick, and I didn't have any issues with extraction. Moving back from there, you have our rear slide serrations. They're fairly shallow, but they are squared off quite hard, and they do have enough space in between them to really allow you to get a good purchase. Again, I had no issues actually racking this firearm, whether it was in a standard kind of position like that using the thumb and the index finger, or whether I came over the top like so and racked it that way. They are excellent slide serrations, and I have no qualms about them whatsoever. Moving back from there, you do have a bobbed hammer, as you can see right here on the DAK models, and that's because it's kind of a double action only model, but we'll get into it in depth in a little while. But it's a bobbed hammer, and it drops back down to the safety notch position after every trigger press, so it's totally out of your way, and it is snag free. So let's move on to our pick rail right here. You do have an accessory rail. It's a 3-slot accessory rail. As you can see right here, it is the SIG style of rounded rails. Not really sure why they go with that, but I did mount an old school SIG TAC light on this guy, as well as a Streamlight TLR1HL and then a Streamlight TLR7X. They were all mounted to this, and I had no problem with them coming loose, working their way off, wiggling around, anything like that. They all fit and functioned just fine on this guy. Moving further back from there, we have a disassembly lever, which I am a big fan of on these firearms if I can get a disassembly lever, and unfortunately due to YouTube restrictions, I'm not going to be able to show you disassembly of firearms anymore on this channel. But as you can see right here, you have some horizontal serrations this way, and then you have a bit of a hard edge on it, or a larger bump out, to make it easier for you to disassemble. And the way to actually do that is quite literally locking the slide to the rear, and then you're just going to push that disassembly lever down 90 degrees, and then once you drop your slide very carefully and let it slide off your slide rails, there you go. Then you can remove your barrel, your guide rod assembly, that kind of stuff. Service the weapon. Reassembly is the exact opposite. You put everything back together, slide your slide back, lock it to the rear, and then put your disassembly lever back up into this position, drop your slide, and you're good to go. Speaking of dropping your slide, let's talk about our slide lock / slide release, whatever you want to call it. It's right here, and it has some horizontal serrations. This is everything that a Glock slide lock should be. It's protruding further out from the frame. It's slightly larger than the one on the Glock, and I like it a lot. The reason why I like it a lot is its positioning. It's very easy to actuate one-handed. So if I lock the slide to the rear here, and then I decide to drop it, which again, I probably am not supposed to show, but I'm going to show you. It's very easy to just hit it right there, and that makes your reloads lightning fast on this guy. So off camera, I'm going to insert a magazine and drop the slide, and you can hear just how fast this goes. Super quick. So your reloads on this guy are really good, and it's much better in my opinion than it is on the 226. Now here's the reason. Here's my 226 I previously reviewed. Now I did some work on it, but on this particular firearm, I noticed when shooting it, my thumb tends to ride right here on the slide lock. So when the magazine runs dry, I wouldn't get that slide locking to the rear, and then I would have to manually insert a fresh magazine and rack the gun, or I would have to count my rounds, and once I fired the 12th and final round, I would insert a new magazine and then rack it that way. On the P229, that wasn't an issue. For whatever reason, my thumb doesn't ride on that slide lock, so this will go to slide lock on an empty magazine, and then as you saw, lightning fast reloads, so it works extremely well. You do have a generous beaver tail on this guy, and we'll get into that in detail a little bit later on, but it does fit into the web of your hand quite nicely. It would be better with a newer grip, but again, we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's talk about our trigger guard. Our trigger guard is nice. It's in large, so if you have gloved hands on, you can get your trigger finger in there. The front, right here, has some horizontal striations on it. If you want to hook your support hand index finger around that to shoot like some people do. It works really well for that. The actual serrations that they put on here do give it a nice grippy kind of texture. So you could do that, and it's hooked at the bottom as well for that kind of thing, as you can see right here. Moving back, you do have a bit of an undercut here, and it does make it quite comfortable. Your magazine release is right there. It is slightly ovaled, it's checkered, and it works flawlessly. I had no issues bobbling with it or anything like that. Now this does have the traditional two-piece panel grip versus the E-squared modernized grip like you see here on this 226, and we'll talk about the differences real quick, because if you are to get a modern brand new 229, it's gonna have this grip on here, and this is a huge improvement. The reasons for the grip's improvement is if you look at the front strap right here, you do have some horizontal serrations right there, and they're very similar to the ones on the trigger guard. The issue is they're a lot finer and they're a lot smoother. They might as well not even be there. Now on the traditional two-panel grip that you can see here, there is some decent texturing to it. This one's obviously older, so it's a little slicker, and it does have the same texturing on the back strap of the grip. The other thing that bothers me about this grip right here is on this beaver tail, the grips have, as you can see, this hard ledge right there, and eventually it really doesn't feel good on the hand while you're shooting it. Obviously the 40 caliber model is going to recoil more than the 9mm model, but same principle. Once you get it into the web of your hand right here, it starts to rub you a little raw after about 100 rounds. Not a huge deal in practice, a big deal, your hand hurts a little bit, and then in self-defense, you're definitely not going to shoot that many rounds through this gun unless you're in the military and you're in a bad way. With that being said, the E-squared grip is much better. First of all, it's a little thinner, it's a little easier to get your hand wrapped around it. It has better texturing all the way around, except for the front strap because it has the same serrations. And then as you can see right here, they got rid of that hard ledge and they kind of beveled it in a lot better, so you don't get that irritation with the newer grips than like you would on the old grips. Just something to be aware of. On the older style grips, you'll get that, but you probably won't have to worry about it, because if you buy one, you're going to get the newer grip anyways. So let's talk about our magazine well. Our magazine well is beveled on the left and right side, not so much on the front or rear, as you can see right here on at least the standard models. The magazine well isn't an issue. Mag slide in and drop free, no problem. And I didn't have any issues reloading this gun or from the magazines themselves. By the way, the magazines, again, are a 12-round capacity. The witness holes are very accurate. It has a plastic base pad with a little bit of a pinky extension to fit your hand really well. And I don't know how they did this. This was some sort of weird Swiss magic that they were able to get, but they shortened not only the length of the slide, but the height of the overall grip on this guy when developing the 229 from the 226, and yet it holds the same capacity. So it has something to do with the magazine well, because if you are to insert a P226 magazine, it will fit and function flawlessly in this guy, but you can't put a P229 magazine into a 226, not only because it's too short, but it's too fat. It just does not go into the magazine well. Let me show you what I'm talking about. So this is a P226 magazine in the P229. As you can see, it fits no problem. It does extend a little bit, but obviously that's because it has a longer grip. Now, if I try to insert the P229 magazine into the 226, here's what happens. It just jams up right there and you can't insert it anymore. So I think the getting the same capacity out of a smaller, more compact package has everything to do with the fact that they probably widened out the magazine well and increased the width of the magazine. But again, as a note, 226 mags will fit and function flawlessly in this gun. So, I know what you're all waiting for now. It is the trigger. Now, the P229 trigger, standard double action, single action, is identical to the 226 trigger. Let me just clear this firearm real quick. Yep, we're clear. So the standard trigger, double action, single action, as you can see here, you would get a, let me drop my magazine actually, you would get a double action trigger press, and it's going to come in right at about 6.5, 7 pounds. And then the gun would cycle, and then you would get your hammer sticking to the rear single action, a short reset, and then you would get a much lighter trigger pull right at about 4 pounds. That would be the standard trigger you would be getting if you just had the double action, single action model. And again, I would highly recommend, whether you get the P226 or the P229, that you go with the single action only model if you can. This trigger is a lot different. This is the DAK trigger. It stands for double action Kellerman. Now, versus a standard double action only trigger or the double action single action that I just showed you that the gun normally comes with, what you get on this guy is kind of the opposite of a double action single action, if that makes any sense. So right here, you'll get a long, albeit smooth, 6.5 pound trigger press, and you can see the hammer actuating there. It's long, but it is super smooth, and it's not that heavy. Now, when the gun actually cycles, you have 2 reset points. Your first one is right here. It's kind of far out, and it might seem like you're resetting the trigger all the way, but you're not. And then you hit just a hard wall, no take up, and then if you pull the trigger, you get a shorter, but much heavier trigger pull, which is weird. So it's shorter, but it comes in at 8.5 pounds, 2 whole pounds heavier than just the standard reset. What I mean by that is, if you pull the trigger and then you let the trigger all the way out to what they call your secondary reset, this would be your primary, this would be your secondary, all the way out, you go back to that 6.5 pound trigger press. And I found myself in training courses and just shooting it on my own, that I would just let it go all the way out, because even though it was a longer trigger press, it was a lighter trigger press, and that allowed me to get more accurate shots. Versus that shorter, heavier one, I had a tendency to throw a lot more of my rounds, which I didn't like. So when I shoot this gun, I simply pull the trigger and let it go all the way out. That's just me. You may have a different opinion on the double action Kellerman system, but that's how I shoot it, and that's what I found yielded me the most accuracy. So let's show you this one more time for you to get a really good idea of it. Here is your standard trigger press. You get a couple millimeters of take up right here, or I should say play. Then you get a little bit of take up before your hammer starts to actuate, and then your let off is all the way back basically. Bam, there's your 6.5 pound trigger press. Trigger reset, your primary reset being right here, so it's fairly long, and then again an 8.5 pound trigger press, which is all the way back, and then a full trigger reset or secondary reset point, which I prefer. Again, there's your primary, there's your secondary, and it's all the way out, and then you have that same trigger press all over again. So if you're interested in getting a 229 or a 226, but you're not a fan of the double action, single action transition, the DAK models aren't that bad, because it's a lot more similar to a double action only or a striker fire trigger, because you can fire it this way every time and get the exact same trigger pull and press, same trigger weight and everything, so it gives you an extremely consistent trigger. So let's talk about accuracy real quick. I didn't bring any targets with me today, but I can say honestly and with full confidence that 1.5-inch groups are pretty easy to achieve, and you can do them pretty rapidly with this gun. If you focus a little bit more, you'd be able to get 1-inch groups no problem. The gun is accurate. I have no issues with it whatsoever. Let's talk about reliability. So I put a little over 500 rounds. I believe I put 550 rounds through this particular firearm. And I didn't have any real reliability issues. I will say I had a few malfunctions, and they were failure to go into battery. Now normally I would automatically fail this gun, because my standard is 500 rounds and I allot for 1 failure. 2 or more failures automatically disqualifies the gun, and I don't recommend it for you guys because I wouldn't feel comfortable carrying it myself. That being said, I had 450 rounds through this gun, and I reloaded all my magazines. I got about 6 mags for this guy, and as I was shooting, what was happening was the first round out of the magazine wouldn't go into battery, and then I would just simply press the slide forward, it would go in, and then I would fire, and all the rounds from that magazine would fire no problem. Then I would reload, same thing. First round in a fresh magazine, from slide lock wouldn't go into battery. So that happened about 4 times in a row, and I was like, okay, something is wrong, but it's consistently wrong, so I can eliminate what it is. It's not my magazines. So I pop out my magazine, I clear the gun, I disassemble the gun. It is absolutely bone dry. I've been shooting the gun a lot, I've been carrying a lot. By the way, very comfortable to carry. And I'm like, this thing is absolutely bone dry. There's not a speck of oil anywhere in this. So I grabbed some oil real quick, put a few drops in there, wrapped the slide about a dozen times, loaded the gun back up, and I was 100% back in business. So I'm not going to blame the gun for those malfunctions, because those malfunctions were induced by my lack of preventative maintenance. So understand that this gun's not going to run super well when it's bone dry. You obviously need to clean it and lubricate your firearms. That's on me, not on the gun. Once I did that, I put another 50 rounds through it. No problems whatsoever. It cleared right up. So that's on me, not the gun. So I can say, as long as you clean and lubricate your firearms regularly, you're not going to have any reliability issues with the P229. So it does get a pass from me. So let's talk about the quality of the firearm and some other key notes here. Being a DAK model, again, very similar to a double action model. There is no decocker lever on this guy, as you can see right here, because there's no need to decock it. So you may have noticed that was kind of absent and be a little confused by that. There are grips available from at least Hogue that will cover this portion where the decocking lever usually is. So if you want a little more grip on this guy, you can. I don't see why it's necessary, but if you want to do it for aesthetic purposes, you can get new grips and slap them on. So I'm going to disassemble the gun real quick just to give you a picture of the internals so you can see how high quality this firearm actually is. But needless to say, it's a Sig Sauer and it actually has excellent quality. So overall, I like the gun. It's been reliable. It has been accurate. It's been very consistent. Not the best trigger in the world, but definitely functional. And again, if I was going to get a 226 or a 229 now, I would definitely get the single action only models. Other than that, I got nothing for you. This has been Aaron with Ghost Raptor Gaming and Guns. You guys have a nice day.